All right, hello everyone. My name is Kristen Modulewski. I'm the Senior Digital Marketing Specialist here at Clark Reliance, and we have another Q&A session for you today. You asked, and now we're going to answer. More specifically, my guy Andy Teske is going to answer. He's our Jerguson Glass Gauge and Valve Product Manager. How are you doing today, Andy?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. So today, I'm sure you see this thing right here. Well, this thing is the Jerguson Lumistar Illuminator. This is what we're going to be talking about today. So Andy, why don't you just give us a quick rundown of what this is?
Sure. Yep, this is our EPL 100 illuminator. Specifically, this is our 316 stainless steel version. You can see the light bar in the back here and then the power supply to my left. Traditionally, an illuminator is mounted on a transparent gauge, which is the demo that I have set up here. The idea with an illuminator is, in our industry, in the process world, there's a lot of thick, heavy, dark substances and gauges, and it's tough to read the level. So you put an illuminator on the back, and we have really bright LEDs that shine through, and they can allow you to see the level from this side of the gauge. I'm not going to point this at the camera because I don't want to blind everybody. You looked at it earlier. It's really bright. But specifically what we're talking about today is this stuff mounted on the back of the gauge.
So you mentioned, Andy, that this is a transparent gauge. We have a couple of people asking if we can have an illuminator on a reflex gauge.
Sure. Yeah, we get that question occasionally, and the answer is yes, you certainly can. As I mentioned earlier, the traditional installation is like this on the back of the gauge, shining light through. Obviously, on a reflex gauge, you wouldn't have this back half of the gauge. It's a solid chamber and one cover. So we just have these simple brackets that mount the illuminator light bar off to the side. I know you can see it. I don't know how well you see it on the camera, but instead of the light bar being straight on, it's off to the side to point it at the gauge and give you a little bit better visibility.
Thank you, Andy. So we have a couple of people out in the field. They're wondering, they already have a 24 VDC instrument loop. Is it possible for them to add the barrier-driven illuminator to the same loop?
No, you cannot install the 24-volt illuminator on the same loop with other instrumentation. It has to be on its own dedicated 24-volt loop.
Okay. Can a switch be installed to turn on or off the illuminator when it's installed?
It can be. It's not a real common request we get. The LEDs are rated to about 100,000 hours, so typically it's not necessary to put a switch on there. We know some customers do, and if people want to do that, obviously you have to have certified installers and technicians and follow all the codes and regulations. And additionally, that would all happen outside of our power supply. The power supply, the blue cable, and the light bar itself, that's what makes up the whole illuminator. So if a customer wanted to install a switch, they would have to do that outside of our power supply in their own cabinet or however they want to do it. It can be done, but it's not something we offer.
So if you're wanting to upgrade to LED illuminators, the standards require an AC normal power source, but also have a DC for backup and emergency purposes, for just-in-case purposes. You want to talk about that?
Sure. That's a really interesting question. The illuminator we have here, this is an AC power supply, so it's taking AC power. It's a demo, so it's just plugged into the wall over here. And there's a transformer inside that transforms that AC power to DC, and that's what powers the light. Separately, our DC powered illuminator is the same light bar, and then you just run DC directly into the light. Because these things are, well, the way that they're designed for hazardous areas and to get all the approvals and things, there isn't any place on here to put a separate connection. And the way I'm understanding that question is they would want an illuminator like this with their AC power, and then something, if the power goes out, then it switches to DC power. That's not really a thing that we can't wire up to this. There aren't enough connections for that. That's not how it's designed. This is the only time I've ever heard that question. So I don't know. I don't know if we're misunderstanding the question or they asked the question unclearly, but that's not a thing that I'm aware of that anybody offers in an illuminator.
All right. And I'm sure everyone can see this banner next to me. Can you find the level? That's a really good question, Andy. So can you talk briefly about why color is critical?
Sure. So these are all the same gauge, and I'll talk about these in a second. But this gauge, obviously, it's filled with liquid. We did this here. We did this here in our lab. There's liquid in this gauge. Obviously, you can't see that liquid. So you have a glass gauge on your application, great, but you can't see the level, so it's not helping you out. So then you need to put an illuminator on it. Well, the green illuminator and the amber illuminator in the middle, they're both lights. You can now see those lights in the gauge, but you can't see the level. What's happening is those two lights, the green and the amber, are changing the color of what you see. Our illuminators on the right, we use a white LED. This is oil. It's a yellow oil in here, so when you shine the white LED through it, you just get to see what the fluid is. We're not changing the color of it. That's why we say the color is critical. Step 1 is putting a light on your gauge. Step 2 is getting the right light on your gauge.
Well, thanks for answering our questions today, Andy.
Sure.
And thank you guys for asking them. If you have any more questions for us, feel free to email us at askus@clark-reliance.com. We look forward to your questions. We love making these Q&A videos for you, so keep them coming in. Andy's giving a webinar on this topic, illumination and why color is critical. So for further information on this topic, go to the resource section of Jerguson.com.